Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have regrets from Councillors Grant and Councillor Khan.
Thank you. Council, do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Thank you. Would you like to proceed into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Duddick and Councillor Johnston, all in favor? Opposed, if any? We are resolved into Committee of the Whole. We have no consent items on this evening's agenda, and our first item is the public hearing, being the public meeting associated with the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision Phase 2A for Davis Minardi Home Corporation, which is west of Nayagawa Boulevard and south of Burnhamthorpe Road. And if you'll turn your attention to staff, we will listen to Brenda summarize the report that has been provided to you previously. Ms. Stan, Council looks forward to your summary.
Good evening. Oh, I'm there. Sorry about that. Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of Council. Tonight I'm here to present the public meeting report for the zoning bylaw amendment and plan of subdivision applications submitted by Davis Minardi Home Corp to permit a residential plan of subdivision. The purpose of this meeting is to introduce the planning applications which have been received. This is also the statutory public meeting, which provides the public with an opportunity to provide comments on the applications. Issues raised at this meeting will be discussed in the recommendation report. No decisions will be made at this time. The Phase 2A subdivision lands are located in North Oakville on the west side of Nayagawa Boulevard, south of the King's Christian Collegiate, and south of Burnhamthorpe Road. The lands have an area of approximately 6.3 hectares. The lands are designated as Nayagawa Urban Core Area and Natural Heritage System. The lands are currently zoned as existing development, the ED zone, which only permits legally existing uses, buildings, and structures. The draft zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone the lands from the ED zone to an appropriate zoning categories to implement the proposed plan of subdivision. These applications are contained within a phase within a larger plan of subdivision. The Phase 1 lands of this plan were recommended for approval by Council and approved by the OMB in 2010. The Phase 2A lands were removed at that time as regional servicing allocation was not available. These applications deal with the lands known as Phase 2A. Surfacing has now been allocated to these lands. The Phase 2A subdivision consists of 50 semi-detached dwellings and 82 townhouses. The plan area also includes the natural heritage system and stormwater management areas. The application is currently in circulation to internal town departments and external agencies for review. A recommendation report will be prepared and presented to Council, evaluating the applications and addressing any issues raised. The recommendation is that comments from the public on the proposed zoning bylaw amendment and plan of subdivision application submitted by Davis Minardi Home Corporation be received. That concludes my presentation. I will be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stan. Council, questions? Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. Ms. Stan, are you aware of the issues or the suggestions from King's Christian Collegiate with respect to drainage as well as servicing?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I received the letter today from King's Christian Collegiate, so that'll be addressed as an issue as part of our recommendation report. I understand that King's representatives from King's Christian Collegiate did meet with the developers, the applicant this afternoon, so hopefully through the next report we can address their concerns.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe they can address that as well. But staff are aware of this, and this will be reviewed in conjunction with the overall package. Not lots of nods. Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Stan.
Any others? Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, would you call any listed delegation?
Yes, we have Mr. Cheeseman here representing King's Christian Collegiate.
Welcome, Mr. Cheeseman. Do you have information for us?
Some, sir. Good evening, Your Worship and members of committee. My name is Cheeseman, and I am here on behalf of King's Christian Collegiate, the owner of lands immediately north of the Davis-Minardi lands. There is a letter that I submitted to you. Our concerns are set out in the letter. I did want to point out to the committee that we have had a meeting this afternoon with the developer in a spirit of cooperation, and we are hoping that all of the matters here can be addressed. We wanted to make sure that we were on the record. People knew that we were there, and that our concerns would be addressed through the planning process, through both the town and the region where its jurisdiction pulls in.
Thank you very much for bringing us that information. Councillor Knoll.
Just a quick question. You heard my question to staff and their assurance that they're going to review this in conjunction with the application. Are you satisfied with that as a process?
And we want to be included in those discussions if we can.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Any others? Mr. Cheeseman, thank you very much for your information.
Thank you, sir.
Madam Clerk, are there any more listed delegations?
No, there are no further listed delegations.
Are there any members of the public here with information for council on this item? Ms. Brock? Council welcomes you. We look forward to your information.
Good evening. My name is Karen Brock, and I represent Oakville Green Conservation Association. I just wanted to highlight some things. I know this is just for consideration for the future, but I did want to highlight some concerns, in particular relating to trail planning. And I did read through the environment implementation report. And on page 62 and 63, it does make reference to trail planning. And I was a bit disturbed to still see reference to multi-use trails. And as you're aware, the Trails Master Plan for North Oakville East is still pending. So I was a bit concerned that when this...
Ms. Brock?
Yes.
What item are you speaking to?
I am speaking to the Davis-Minardi homes.
Oh, okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
And I guess the quote that got my attention, it says, "The cultural thicket communities could not be avoided by the proposed trails plan alignment location." So I know there has been discussion in the subcommittee and plans by staff to look at the trails alignment, and this is probably one of those perfect examples where perhaps a trail would not be warranted in that area. Even though it is not a woodlot, it is a thicket, but certainly it does have some significance from a wildlife point of view. I know RBG quoted saying that about 43% of songbirds do prefer a thicket, much like this one represented. So I just wanted you to be aware that a trail was still planning to go through that area. Unfortunately, I couldn't find map 6.3, which I think was supposed to denote where that trail was going to be going through. But I would appreciate if staff and council could clarify that trailblazing will not begin until the final trails plan is released.
Thank you for your information. Any questions? Thank you, Mayor. Any other members of the public with information for council on this item? Please come forward, please introduce yourself, and we look forward to your information.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Chris Matson. I'm here representing Davis-Minardi, and I'm here simply to say that I have really nothing further to add to Ms. Stan's presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay. Are there questions? Thank you for being available. Anyone else? Going twice, going thrice. Councillor Knoll.
Your Worship, I'll move the staff recommendation contained on page 1 that we receive the item.
Thank you, Councillor. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is adopted. Okay, that brings us to our second agenda item, our first discussion item, and this would be the North Oakville Urban Forest Strategic Management Plan. And we are turning our attention to Mr. Darnell Lambert. And council, of course, has a detailed report, which everybody's read. And Mr. Lambert will synopsize the report for the benefit of the public.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This evening I have the pleasure of presenting to you the North Oakville Urban Forest Strategic Management Plan, or at least some highlights to present to you since the last time we were before you with this plan. As you may recall, this plan did come forward to you in the fall of last year. There were a number of questions raised. A subcommittee of council was then set up. We heard a number of delegations and questions, and this evening we're bringing the plan back before you with some suggested modifications, and I'm going to highlight those for you this evening. So looking back since November 14th of 2011, what did we do? Again, established a subcommittee of council, heard a number of concerns raised by the North Oakville Community Builders Incorporated and Oakville Green, in particular respecting soil quality, soil quantity, species type and biodiversity, development impact, and implementation. So I'm going to focus on each one of those and just briefly touch on what was one of the concerns and where are we at and how are we going to address it. One of the concerns were we need to spell out measures for soil quality within the North Oakville Urban Forestry Strategic Management Plan. Actually, soil quality goes back to 2008, even before this plan came forward, was presented to council that we needed to improve our topsoil or our soil quality, not only for the planting of trees, but within the public lots and the public boulevards and even within the private lots to which sodding takes place. There was a concern back then as we moved away from some of the herbicide use that how do we have our grass grow greener, and improving the quality and the depth of topsoil was our response to that. So with that, our standards today are 200 millimeters of topsoil within any private lot and within the public boulevard. And even at that time, we improved the quality standard for our soil at that time. And there's the obligation on the development industry to have certified laboratory testing done as part of the development process for the soil that's being brought in or being handled on site. Just with that though, as with any other standard, things change over time, and we will always look for better ways to do things and better standards to which to apply to our community. And with that, one of the concerns is our soil standards for topsoil and for tree planting, should they be one and the same or should they be different? And we've even looked to the region of York has a fairly new standard out specifically talking about soil for its tree planting standards. So staff through the year of 2012 will be looking at that standard and any other best management practices that are out there and adopting same where appropriate in order to achieve our goal of planting better trees and achieving our canopy goal coverage. Soil quality. What is the soil volume requirement for achieving a 40% canopy cover? And if you've read the report, you will see in there that we're looking at 45 cubic meters for large trees, 30 cubic meters for a medium tree, and 15 cubic meters for a small tree, and a planting depth of 750 millimeters. When we look at North Oakville, 80% of the planned canopy area in North Oakville can support those target volumes. And that's within the natural heritage systems, our parks, our cemeteries, and our stormwater management ponds. Sorry, and the mouse has gone asleep, so I will revert to something else. In the remaining 20% area, that's the residential, employment, commercial, transitional areas, it's going to be a bit more of a challenge. So we are recommending a planting volume of 30 cubic meters across the board, which is based on a medium stature tree, and a protocol that acknowledges that this volume will be challenging within our road right-of-way. Bear with me 1 second. Looking at the challenging locations, and where I woke it up. And where the challenges of meeting that 30 cubic meters is met with some resistance because of utilities or driveways or things of that in the area, we'd be implementing a breakout zone, which means we would be putting a special material, a more porous material, open granular, underneath the sidewalk area to allow the roots to pass through and into the front lawn area of the private lot. One of the concerns raised was that breakout zone is in conflict with the local gas line that provides gas to the residential homes in the area, and that the 600 or 500 millimeter depth is too deep. So through our discussions, through the committee, we're recommending that depth could actually be reduced to 300 millimeters. In order to avoid that conflict. So there'll be a reduction in that particular detail with respect to a breakout zone. I did have an animated slide that would show that, but it's not quite working out. So just imagine that blue area that you see before you on the screen not being as deep as it is, but actually being slightly less so as to avoid the conflict with the little yellow square box that you see in the bottom, which is actually where your local gas line would be. And I'm going to try my best. There we go. Species type and biodiversity. We did hear from concerned persons that invasive species, we should speak to invasive species within the North Oakville Urban Forestry Strategic Management Plan. We concur with that. Invasive species is problematic for us, so we would be making the noted change that invasive species would be a prohibited application. Also, we were looking at increasing the native species planting requirement, improving it from 20 to 33%. And lastly, there was a concern about biodiversity and making sure that when we plant our streets, there is a variety of different types of trees. And in fact, our North Oakville Urban Forestry Management Plan speaks specifically to that in one of the sections, 7.4.34, I think, if you wanted to refer to that one. It sets out the criteria that there will be no more than a certain percent when there is a certain quantity of trees being planted. So we feel that that's addressed quite appropriately within the plan. Development yield impact. There was concern that this new, not necessarily the planting requirement, but the requirement for the overall tree canopy coverage for commercial and industrial type parking lots would impact the development yield. Our response to that is, before we make the amendment to the bylaw, we would like to bring forward an actual plan, a commercial or industrial plan, to demonstrate that it would work. So we are certainly going to work closely with the development industry when those applications move forward to see if there is any reason or rationale for making any suggestion change to it. We've had some good friendly dialogue on the matter, and so when we move through an actual site plan application, we will be able to come forward to you with what would that zoning bylaw amendment look like. But we are going to be striving for improved canopy coverage over those areas. So in short, achieving the vision of a 40% canopy cover requires new standards that are aligned with achieving that canopy target, implementable, and sustainable. And tonight, you have before you the North Oakville Urban Forestry Strategic Management Plan that we believe achieves that goal, and we recommend your approval of that this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert, very much for that. Madam Clerk, well, first, Council, do you have any questions of Mr. Lambert before I ask the public if they have any information for us? Councillor Dumont.
Since you had diagrams and everything here, I thought this might be appropriate here as opposed to later, but can these best practices also be used in other developments in town? So and I'm thinking specifically of something like Canada Lands, for example. So if we have best practices that we're using for this type of thing, are those the kind of things that can be transferred elsewhere in town, or is it strictly for this one area?
No, they can be, and I think one of the recommendations is that we would review the standards in particular for areas south of Dundas Street so that we could in fact do just what you're saying.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Are there any members of the public with information for council on this matter? Are there any registered delegations? Ms. Brock? Welcome back to the podium.
Yes, hello again. Again, I'm representing Oakville Green. I just wanted to commend staff and council for taking the time to listen to many members of of Oakville about the urban forest strategic management plan, and really commend you for what looks like a wonderful result. Healthy roots mean healthy crown so that trees can attain their maximum growing potential. Greater canopy cover contributes to healthier citizens. So we look forward to continuing our partnership with the town of Oakville in planting trees in public spaces, but also would be eager. I know there was one mention of looking for incentives with plantings in, can't hear me? Plantings in people's backyards. I know there are models in Toronto and Vaughan and City of Guelph, so that is certainly an initiative that Oakville Green would be very interested in pursuing. I did want to put in a plug, of course, for parking lot plantings. I think there are many other municipalities that plant one tree for 5 parking spaces, and I think it is so important. None of us want to park in a blistering hot parking lot, and certainly today is one of those days, and we want it to certainly contribute to the overall urban forest canopy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Questions? Thank you. Councillor Elgar?
Your Worship, thank you. Through you, I do have a recommendation, and my recommendation would be, as listed in the staff report, recommendation number 1, and to that recommendation I would add, with the exception that within the public road allowance area where the prescribed target volume of 30 cubic meters cannot be attained, a breakout zone shall be constructed as detailed in Appendix C. And the other recommendations 2, 3, 4, and 5 would remain the same. And I would add recommendation 6 and 7. And number 6 would be that staff be directed to routinely review current tree selection, planting, and maintenance standards and specifications in other municipalities, and to modify our current standards and specifications where reasonable, and serve to improve the achievement of the town's tree canopy objective. And number 7, that staff be directed to report back to council within 12 months of the approval of the North Oakville Urban Forestry Strategic Management Plan for the purpose of advising council on the successes, challenges, and modifications implemented in meeting the objectives of the plan. And I would just ask, as staff, do they have any concerns with this recommendation?
We have no concerns with that.
I thank you, and I would hope everybody can support this recommendation. Thank you.
I have an indication of a question or else remarks from Councillor Adams. Councillor Adams?
I just wanted to thank Councillor Elgar for all of his due diligence and his work on this matter. He spent a lot of extra effort on it, and it shows up again today in the extra recommendations that he's bringing to us. While it might seem simple, bringing it back at a later date to review where we can get even better is really important. And so I want to thank Councillor Elgar for that, because it's his efforts that have always made us a greener place. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Elgar, do you want to speak to your motion?
No, I think we've spoken a lot about this over the years, so I'm just hoping everybody supports it tonight, and I'd like to thank staff too for all the work they have done on it and all the research they have done across Ontario.
Thank you.
Also, I forgot to mention, we had a subcommittee, and it was Councillor Robinson, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Grant, and myself on that committee, and you were also there. So it was we got a lot done, and I'm really proud of that committee's subcommittee's work. Thank you. And of course, Councillor Adams.
All right, if there's no further discussion, I'll put the vote. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. That brings us to discussion item number 2, agenda item number 3, the Bronte Village Heritage Resources Review and Strategy. These are updated recommendations from Sue Schappert. And if you'll give your attention now to Ms. Schappert. She will
Thank you.
lead us through the highlights.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of council. I'm just here to take you through the updated recommendations to the Bronte Village Heritage Resources Review and Strategy. As I think many of you will remember, the strategy was a requirement of the Livable Oakville Plan, and it was presented to council last fall in October. And one of the, there are actually several recommendations that required some follow-up actions, and so that's why we're here tonight reporting back to you. The two recommendations were essentially to seek further input regarding the applicable planning tools that might be helpful to preserve heritage in Bronte. And those recommendations included holding a public information meeting and also using a survey to help collect feedback. Oops. So we held a public meeting in this past February. It was very well attended at the Walton Memorial United Church. There's a staff presentation on planning tools. We talked about zoning, urban design guidelines, community improvement plans, and heritage designation, heritage conservation districts. We divided into small table groups so that we could have some discussions about how people felt about ranking these planning tools and what they thought would be most effective at preserving heritage in Bronte and what they felt was most threatened in the area. The survey was posted online and available in hard copy immediately after that public meeting. It was available for almost exactly 1 month, and we had 127 survey responses, which was actually very good. We were pleased with those results. A couple of areas of interest I'd like to highlight for you. There certainly were a few more areas mentioned in the surveys, but generally there were 4 highlights of concern and of interest for the survey respondents. The vast majority of respondents did identify the Bronte Harbor as an area worthy of heritage designation and protection. However, staff are unable to designate the entire harbor area as heritage, as a large portion of it is controlled by the Fisheries and Oceans Canada, which is the federal government, and the Ontario Heritage Act does not apply to those properties. And so what staff are proposing to do is to add the town-owned portions of Bronte Harbor to the Oakville Heritage Register as a property of potential cultural heritage value or interest. As a short-term measure, which I'm sure you may have noticed actually shows up in a later report tonight, as well as a longer-term strategy, we would like to have a cultural heritage landscape assessment done to determine what features are of cultural heritage value in the harborlands and what's worthy of protecting and what should our strategy be in order to protect those things. Staff would also like to eventually bring forward a designation for the Metro Marine Building, which is already listed on the Oakville Heritage Register, and we hope to bring that forward to you sometime in the future. I think it's important to note that while we are certainly emphasizing that heritage in Bronte Harbor should be protected, in no way do we mean to impede the functioning use of the harbor. And I'd just like to make a note that heritage definitely does not restrict the use, and that as we move forward with heritage preservation strategies, it's something that we'd certainly be considering. The second area I'd like to just briefly go over is what I've called the Seneca Drive neighborhood. And so that is the area that is south of Lakeshore Road, just to the west of the creek, and bordered along Mississauga Street down to the lake. We had a number of respondents, issue requests to protect this area in a number of different manners. There really wasn't a consensus on how that should be done. Staff have taken a little bit further look into designating the area as a heritage conservation district, and it's our opinion at this time that it would not meet the requirements set out in the Ontario Heritage Toolkit that I've discussed in the report, which talk about visual coherence, a framework of elements, concentration of heritage resources, and distinctiveness. While the area certainly does have some of these, it doesn't have all of them, and we've decided that we would like to recommend to you a different strategy to acknowledge and preserve the heritage in that area. And again, that is a cultural heritage landscape assessment, which will look more at the landscape as well as built features by man, but not so much an emphasis on some of the buildings, which certainly have changed over time. We also looked at how to apply zoning and urban design to this particular area, and it's staff recommendation that both of these areas have ongoing projects right now in the Planning Services Department, in that they would best be dealt with through those venues. So zoning in this particular area could be dealt with through the in-zone project, and urban design probably as part of the urban design manual. The Bronte Pioneer Cemetery was also identified as an area of heritage value, and it certainly is. It's already designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There was a certain amount of concern noted regarding the condition of the cemetery at the time, and that concern has been shared with the manager of harbors and cemeteries. So staff have followed up with some of those concerns to let people know that there is a timeline for restoration work, and according to the assessment that was endorsed by Heritage Oakville in 2008 from the cemeteries and harbors staff, the timeline right now is 2017. The other area of concern that was noted were the Ontario Street properties. So Glendella Post Office and the police station down on Ontario Street, all of these properties are designated under Part 4 of the Act, and they also have easement agreements in place for the restoration. As well, in 2011, Council approved an extension to the easement agreement for the restoration works till early summer 2012. Work has been delayed, but staff are now receiving weekly update reports from the project manager for that particular project and have been assured that it will be finished this summer. And just in case, the town has securities in place for restoration works. So I'd just like to make a quick explanation about what you can see in the recommendation regarding the town's cultural heritage landscape strategy. This was in the Heritage Planning Work Plan, and we had identified a target year of 2014, mainly because at that time there weren't any, emergency or urgent landscape assessments that we thought needed to be undertaken. However, as this report is recommending that we undertake 2 cultural heritage landscape assessments, we need to complete the strategy in order to ensure consistency in the assessments that are going to be completed for the town. And so staff are moving up the strategy in our work plan so that we can complete it as soon as possible and put out the RFPs for cultural heritage landscape assessments if our recommendations are, of course, accepted by council. And so the recommendation is before you. I'd just like to point out that there is a slight change on the screen from what is in your report. It's in section 2B, and what it says on the screen is undertake a cultural heritage landscape assessment of the Bronte Harbor and Seneca Drive neighborhood following the completion of the town's cultural heritage landscape strategy. In the report it says terms of reference. Those terms of reference essentially are going to be the cultural heritage landscape strategy, so we're just trying to simplify. Thanks very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, you've got a few. Councillor Duddick?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, just again to echo the sentiments that were echoed around the Heritage Committee room. Tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of public consultation. Very, very well done. I'm glad you hit on the 2 issues that I brought away from the presentations that took place at the Oakville Heritage Committee meeting, and that was the harbor. And we've got Mr. Lansdowne's letter on our desk, and I appreciate the fact that you basically summarized what the responses were rather, and that it was no way that we were saying no to it, but just our limitations and what the next steps of the plan were. The other concern was Ms. McAlpine brought forward concerns regarding the cemetery there and people having access to it. Now, I appreciate the fact that you've contacted staff and received some sort of an update. Do you know whether or not there's been a dialogue between the Bronte Historical Society and the cemetery staff in regards to that? And maybe my colleague will be able to answer that.
I can answer that one Friday, this Friday.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that there was a coordinated effort there. Thank you very much.
One way or another, Councillor Duddick gets her answer. All right, anyone else? Madam Clerk, are there listed delegations?
Yes, we have Mr. Andy Bruce hear from the Bronte Historical Society.
Mr. Bruce, welcome to the meeting. The council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship and councilors. I'm here talking to it. I've been in contact pretty constant with the heritage planning and that to see what's going on. And one of my concerns was when I read the 3-year heritage, and I live in the area. I was one of the instigators of looking into cultural heritage landscapes. For that, when Michael Seaman came on and the two assistants came on, and it was very positive, and it's an interesting one we're going for, which is a cultural heritage landscape as opposed to that, but it still would keep the same control. One of the problems in the last few years we've had, of course, is if all of you have been down and have a look, you'll all of a sudden see these 2 big red brick, high as they could build it and as big as they could fill the lot up, buildings. And of course that and the rest right beside them are little cottages, etc., and even ones that are newer or heritage buildings. So it is, and living there, you hear all the time when people stumble onto the area, they don't know about it and say, I never knew there was such a nice area here. And we always say, well, we try to keep it a secret. But anyhow, my concern is that I'd love to see it go through and as fast as possible, and hopefully we can get it designated as a cultural heritage landscape. That's the Seneca Road area. And as far as the rest of them, there is lots more. I don't know what's going on with the other parts of Bronte, but this would be wonderful if it gets through and gets going and we actually can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruce. Questions? Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public with information for council on this item? I will turn to council for Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to recommend the staff recommendation. I just want to thank staff for all their hard work and for all the public who have also participated and will continue to participate as we go forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is adopted. All right, that brings us to item number 4, the Heritage Register update and the report from Planning Services Department, where the recommendation is that the properties in Appendix B of the report be added to Oakville's Register of Properties of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest, and that the listed non-designated heritage properties in Appendix C be removed from Oakville's Register of Properties. Are there any delegations on this item? Any members of the public with information for council on this item? Chair recognizes Councillor Adams.
I'd like to move the item number 4 with one modification, which is I'd like to separate the Oakville Arena site, which is I think 133 Rebecca, if I've got the address right, and to refer that to the South Oakville Public Lands Use Subcommittee of Council, if I've got that subcommittee name correct.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor DeMont.
Can I ask why that's being taken out?
That committee is looking at all of the options before council, and I think it makes sense to look at it in the context of the decision around what to do with the various lands that are being discussed.
And one of the options that was in that report was that it would go through the Heritage Advisory Committee. So is your intent that the Heritage Advisory Committee would never take a look at the designation, or what is your intent on that?
No. The committee has looked at it, is my understanding, and it's sent its recommendation to us, and I'm suggesting that we provide that recommendation to the subcommittee of council that's looking at those properties. And eventually that comes back to full council again for our consideration.
Councillor Duddick.
Thank you. I wonder if we could have Heritage staff just remind members of council in terms of what is entailed with having it on the properties of interest. Namely, it's a form, my understanding, to protect in the possible anticipation of a demolition permit before such time as the research is done. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Dudek, that's correct. It's just in order for town staff and Heritage Oakville and Council to have 60 days to review the item, the property, and determine if it has heritage value that merits designation or if demolition can be approved. So it will come back to Council either way.
But obviously the demolition, given that we're the owners of the property, there's, I don't want to say the threat, but the possibility of that taking place without public consultation, and that's not an option, basically.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused the last question. If it's coming through, if it did go through the regular process of a demolition application, if it was listed on the Heritage Register, it would go through the Heritage Oakville and to Council through that public process. Again, through the other study, it would also be involved in public process, but I can't say to what extent that would be in the end.
I guess my point was that it's a town-owned property versus maybe a person, a private interest, who is maybe looking at flipping the property or doing something of that nature.
Correct, yeah.
Councillor DeMoff.
So what kind of process will Oakville Arena go through in terms of a heritage report? If it's not on this list, will the full report still be done and investigation as to whether it's a heritage property, and what would the process be then if it's removed from this?
I might defer to Jane Closey, maybe?
It would be a very similar process that you'd be going through to list it as you are now. Certainly as part of the subcommittee, you'd be considering the heritage attributes through that subcommittee in any event, taking into consideration what Heritage Oakville has already said on the listing. So it's a very similar process.
So if it's listed, staff would do a report and it would go to the Heritage Advisory Committee prior to coming to Council. Is that correct? What I'm asking, if we take it off of this list, will the Heritage Advisory Committee ever have a say on this, or will it strictly be staff and Council?
Heritage Oakville has already given its indication in terms of recommending it to be listed. So you've had that input of Heritage Oakville. Now the decision is up to Council on what you wanted to do with it. I think the recommendation from Councillor Adams is to allow it to go through the subcommittee before it then comes back to Council for consideration. And I would add that the main purpose of having a listed property is to provide for a private landowner or the town an opportunity, if it's a private landowner, to have an input on a demolition. Normally demolitions can be issued within 10 days. In fact, we have an obligation to issue them within 10 days. But if a property is listed, and they apply for a demolition permit, then it's 60 days. So being the owner of the property gives us much more control over its future.
But we're leaving two other town-owned properties on the list, the properties that are listed, are we not, even though we own them? It's just wondering why this is being treated differently than other town-owned properties. And my other question, though, was what, so when it goes from being listed to someone wants to demolish it, staff does a report, and then does that report not go back to the Heritage Advisory Committee?
If there's a request for a demolition or there is a request to designate, which could be either of those, there is an obligation to consult with Heritage Oakville.
So could we include a requirement to have whatever report we're doing go to Heritage Oakville to review whatever we're doing? We're basically taking that step out by what we're doing. We're taking the step that Heritage Oakville will review this again. Am I right?
No. No. Council is merely delaying the recommendation from Heritage Oakville to list the property so that the committee can complete its work without being encumbered by a decision that we would make before they'd finished their work. And ultimately, everything still comes back to Council. Councillor Elgar and then Councillor Dudek.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. My question to staff is, what is the negative of leaving this on the Heritage Registry now? What am I missing?
Well, it isn't on there yet.
Well, it will be if we vote for it to stay on tonight, though,
It will.
to get it there, and that's what I mean. I want to know what is the negative impact
I can
if,
answer
in
that for
fact,
you.
we
The
do not.
only negative impact is if you have a recommendation before you of rebuilding the place in a different way than you imply by listing it that you might be interested in designating it down the road. And so you risk looking like you're changing your mind. Whereas if you go with the recommendation to wait, you get to make up your mind once you have all the information in front of you, instead of risk appearing to go one direction and then going another.
Okay.
So all that happens is you wait.
Okay, so I can see absolutely no reason why we just wouldn't leave it until we get more information to make up our mind. It doesn't seem like it hurts anything. Is that correct, staff? Am I right in a way, based on what the mayor told me? Is my analysis of what he said correct? It has no negative impact until we get the final input?
No, what I told you is practically the opposite of that.
Okay, I would like to hear what staff, I want to know what the negative is from staff, what they say too.
So if I understand the question correctly, you're asking what is the negative of not listing it or of listing it?
What is the negative of leaving it on the registry, listing it tonight?
The difference, right now you have a recommendation from Heritage Oakville and from staff to list it. You have that information in your hands to take into consideration as you work through the South Central land use study. If you list it tonight, council has then made a decision that it's listed, which I would suggest gives it a slightly higher profile. But at the end of the day, the level of analysis that you're going to put to the Oakville Arena site is going to be the same whether it's listed or not. You are the owner of the property. You've already indicated there's a heritage elements, or it has been indicated to you through Heritage Oakville that there are heritage elements that you need to take into consideration as you deliberate on South Central.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Councillor Duddick.
I guess that what we need is in terms of some sort of confirmation going forward. If we agree to withdraw this from the list at the present time, does that subcommittee or the South Oakville Land Use Study Committee have the opportunity, seeing as there's only 5 of us and we're not to direct staff without a council resolution, can we request that a heritage study be done on the arena in the context of that study? My concern is once it's on the register or the properties of interest, in order to get it removed, that research has to take place. And what I'm trying to get is some sort of confirmation that we can still request that in the context of that subcommittee work. In other words, it doesn't mean the heritage component is a dead issue, so to speak.
Well, that's a procedural question. And the process is quite clear. Council is supreme. If council sends it to the committee to hold it and be part of its job, then when the matter comes back to council, everything's back to council, including that recommendation. And council can order a study, council can list it, council can always do any of the things that are before it. Nothing's prevented to council by a short trip to the committee and back. It comes back.
But in fairness, my concern is that report and the sequencing of that report. You're saying that would be done in isolation of that subcommittee work, is what you're saying. Is that correct? No?
No report would be done, even if you list it, until, it's a long list. They're working through it. So all that will happen is that the property will sit there, able to be looked at by the committee as it is, not listed or anything. And then when the committee reports back, council gets to consider all of its options instead of acting perhaps prematurely. Council loses nothing here. Council just sends it off to its subcommittee, and then it all comes back. Councillor DeMoff.
I don't understand why we would treat this property any differently than any other property that's on here. If there's no downside to any of these being listed, and if it's simply because the town owns it and we won't do anything, we're listing Bronte Harbor and Bronte Bluffs as well, which are two other town-owned properties. So staff feel that it should be listed. I don't, for the life of me, see why we would want to take it off this list.
Councillor, we've already asked a subcommittee of council to study that property. And for that reason, it seemed, and when we asked them to study it, it was as it is. It seems to me that if you wanted to respect the committee you struck, you would let them complete their work and then you would make your decision. You're not doing anything except waiting for a report. Councillor Bird.
I'm starting to get confused as well, because of one of the other properties of the 5 or 6 that we're studying is Lynbrook School, and we designate it as a heritage building. Now we're looking at what possible uses to the same people that are somehow handling that issue, that are, I guess, trying to do it, are incapable of dealing with the question of the Oakville Arena.
The
It's ahead of the-
Lynbrook School was given to the committee to
Right.
study as designated.
What we designated it, then acquired. It wasn't designated. And
Exactly.
if you recall, the then owner wasn't too pleased, if you recall. But anyway, we've got some designated properties, ones that may be designated, and other ones that currently have an indeterminate status on them. So I can't see why, if we start separating it this time, the committee is going to come back in the totality suggesting what we do with all 5 properties. Why at this point in time we're trying to segregate or separate them is beyond me. So I was in favor of what they had, and for the heritage on the register, as you pointed out a number of times, is primarily there to provide some sort of a gap in the demolition process. We're a long way from demolishing any property at this point in time.
That was the whole point of how this is premature, because there's no danger of demolition. However, Councillor Lapworth.
The only question I have for staff is there any incremental insurance cost in designating this property?
No, I know, not that we're aware of. No.
All right. Councillor Adams, I'll put your motion in 2 pieces. The main motion is, so we're separating out the treatment of Oakville Arena, and I'll put the main motion. All in favor of the main motion? Opposed, if any? That carries. And the second piece is the referring of the Oakville Arena treatment to the committee. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That fails. We need someone to put the listing of the arena before council. Councillor DeMoff, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. All right, that brings us to the notice of intention to demolish at 383 Pine Avenue. And does anybody require a report on this? Are there any members of the public with information for council on this? Is there a mover for this? Councillor Duddock. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that item is adopted. That brings us to the recommendation report for the zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for Lower Fourth Limited, Pendant Development Limited. And this is a report. We look forward to Gabe Charles. There he is. Mr. Charles, council looks forward to your highlights of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to clarify for council, there was a separate memo which was provided this evening, which did tweak the recommendation and the report, as well as provide an update to the zoning bylaw. And this presentation is for an application for draft plan of subdivision and an amendment to the town zoning bylaw for properties in North Oakville. Subject property is located northwest of the intersection of Dundas and 6th Line. This slide shows the whole of the land holdings, and the red outline relates to the first phase of the development. There is a registered plan of subdivision to the west and a draft approved subdivision to the east. The property is currently vacant, used for agricultural purposes. There is a portion of the natural heritage system along the northerly part of this first phase. This just gives an idea of what the subdivision looks like in context of the overall land holdings, but this is a bit of a blow up to give a little bit more detail. The subdivision does propose various blocks for residential purposes. There's a school block in yellow, neighborhood park in green, 2 village squares in green, stormwater management pond along Dundas Street, as well as some Dundas urban core blocks. And you'll see the natural heritage system to the north of the subdivision. The major east-west roads are intended to link from the Timpson subdivision to the east with the Davis Minardi farther west at Neagawa. And those are 16-mile drive as well as the future North Park Boulevard. The proposed first phase includes in the official plan, or the secondary plan I should say, neighborhood area, natural heritage system area, Dundas urban core. There's a village square and an elementary school site identified, and the proposal does implement the objectives and the policies of the secondary plan. The North Oakville Master Plan provides a finer grain to the distribution of land uses, including the potential street layout. There is some flexibility in the master plan in that proposals do not need to strictly adhere to the master plan so long as they maintain the intent. The existing zoning for the first phase is existing development. The proposed zoning utilizes the zones which are currently found in the North Oakville zoning bylaw, subject to some minor modifications to that. The schedule to the bylaw that's on the agenda was changed slightly, as I noted, and it is in the zoning bylaw that was put in front of council this evening. There were no changes that were made to the text. Staff is recommending approval of this application. Those are the recommendations before you, and those are reflected in the memo that was tabled with committee just before. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Charles, for your report. Councillor Adams.
Can I just ask a question of clarification? You mentioned it briefly in passing in your comments. When you look at the subject land map and the North Oakville East Master Plan road layout, and then you look at the detail of what is actually being included in the plan of subdivision, they're very slightly different in terms of the local collector, or not the collector road, the local residential roads. The main roads are, as you'd note in the master plan, but there's slight differences in the way the streets are laid out. Can you tell us how that comes to be and what leeway there is for that change?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the road network was refined several times as the application has been reviewed over the past year. The reason being was to ensure that there was good pedestrian, cycling, transit connectivity, that the village squares played a much more of a central role in the overall structure of the community. And from that, the roads were provided more of a grid layout, you could say, compared to the master plan. So the master plan, what it does provide is the overall distribution of the land uses and the general road layout. You'll notice in the master plan there is some flexibility. There's different options for some of the road layouts as well. So through the process over this past year, there was a continued refinement to the overall layout.
Thank you, Worship. I note that on this proposal, the stormwater management facility is on Dundas Street. And as a result, I think that I have my longstanding concern about these facilities being turned into recreational spots, like what ultimately happened in the planning process through Oak Park. And of course, it's the position of our engineering department that that's not appropriate. We've had long discussions about that in council. Darnell's shaking his head. What are we doing, or what sort of plan is there, or what kind of conditions are there to ensure that that spot is not adopted as a recreational facility to avoid some of those those problems that we could end up with down the road with people choosing to conduct guerrilla skating parties and that sort of thing that we see in other stormwater management facilities, which according to our engineering department and best practices is in fact not safe. How are we going to deal with that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this pond would be treated much like many of our other ponds, which receives the appropriate signage that was approved by council, placed at the strategic locations where one would enter the pond area, along with, again, having that vegetated edge along there to kind of deter people from getting close into the pond and making sure that it is, again, well vegetated. That's there. I think we had talked about doing a public awareness through information pieces being handed out to the homeowners that are then moving into this area, that this is a stormwater management facility intended to treat stormwater. It is not a recreational facility.
And I bring this up because we've as a town we have signed the Memorial Park Stormwater Management Facility, I believe one in Ward 6, fairly substantially over the years. Yet we continually have residents use them for recreational purposes against the best judgment of the engineering department. So are you satisfied that the additional, facility or the additional plantings would in fact be that extra step necessary to avoid this in the future?
The one additional item that we do have is called enforcement. And that would be making a call to our police services to enforce the bylaw and advise those that may be on the pond in the winter to move along, and it's not an appropriate place to go. But the signage, and I think our public information pieces have been very effective, but where those are not quite getting there, the enforcement is the next step that comes in.
Okay, the vegetation that you're prescribing for the rim of the pond or the facility, that's designed to avoid, to try to limit access, is that correct?
To deter access.
Not to limit it.
I think what would be proven that even fencing is not an absolute deterrent in its own. We've seen that before where, older children in particular are quite creative about hopping and jumping a fence. Our practice has been to put the appropriate signage up and try to maintain these facilities as blending in with the surrounding environment, making it something that's visually attractive and still reinforces the please don't go there, it's not an appropriate place to be.
And you're satisfied that the developer has appropriately marketed what this is? Because I guess that was the problem I've seen in the past, where these have often been put on the maps as being this lovely community pond, and people move in with the expectation. Are you satisfied the developer has made the necessary arrangements to not oversell this water feature?
This particular pond, if we can take a moment just to speak about this pond, has an interesting deviation, I'll say, from the past on this particular one, where a number of the units fronting on to, they actually front onto the pond. If you've been past the Davis Minardi site at Neagawa and Dundas Street, you'll see that the townhomes there actually front onto the pond. And that will be the same here along this product. In this case, there'll actually be a fence between the private residential area here and the pond itself. They're also looking at hard engineering the edge so that one can get, I'll say, a little bit closer to the pond. And I think when we had the discussion before about how do we treat the ponds, we had talked about doing natural side slopes and then putting the planting in. Here along this particular edge, we're actually inviting the public to be closer to enjoy the vista and the view, and thus the need to go to a fence in this particular area. And I suspect it'll be something ornamental and quite fitting with the area. And again, the fence in this case will serve as the deterrent along with the signage that goes along.
Okay, I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Any others? All right then. Are there any delegations for this item?
Yes, we have Lynn Townsend here representing the applicant.
I see her. She doesn't appear, oh, she is coming. I wonder, Ms. Townsend, would you like me to ask if there's anyone else here first?
Perhaps, yes. I think that'd be a good idea.
Are there any members of the public here, any other members of the public here with information for council on this item? I'm seeing none. Ms. Townsend.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of council. I'm simply here tonight to indicate my client's support for the recommendations in the staff report and here to answer any questions, if there may be any of council.
Thank you very much for being available. Councillor Knoll, are you looking at me because, go ahead.
I'm just ready to give you a motion when the time is appropriate.
We're there.
Okay, well, I will move the the amended staff recommendation, which you'll find on the memorandum dated May 22nd.
Thank you, Councillor. Discussion, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's adopted. Now that brings us to the last discussion item, agenda item number 7, and that is the recommendation report and the proposed zoning amendment application and draft plan of subdivision for Canada Lands Corporation at Dorval and Rebecca. And if you'll give your attention to Charles McConnell, we will be edified.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. So this too is a recommendation report dealing with the application submitted by the Canada Lands Corporation for the lands situated in the northwest quadrant of Dorval Drive and Rebecca Street. Your Worship, this is an application that has been before you through the public meeting, but prior to that, Mr. Chairman, there's been extensive public consultation on this particular parcel of land that goes back some time, but through the livable Oakville policies, there was it has been identified as a special policy area, and there's a specific clause that does exist within the livable Oakville official plan that does identify it just as that, and it recognizes the fact that it's a low density residential designation on these lands, but notwithstanding that, there are permissions for medium attached dwellings on a portion of the lands adjacent to Dorval Drive. So the current zoning of these lands is a residential RO3. So through that entire process and the lands having been owned by the Canada Lands Company, they undertook a very extensive public consultation process. Initially, they had conducted a public open house and circulated the application quite broadly to residents within the area and wanted to understand what the needs and wants were of the community in the context of the realization that the lands could and should be developed at some point in time, but they did want to secure that input from the public in the formation of a proposal. Likewise, the town held its own visioning workshop dealing with these lands so that from a staff perspective, we understood as well what the concerns and the issues and the thoughts were of the general public. So that too helped inform the applicants as to what those desires and the issues were. Subsequent to that, in May of 2011, there was a subsequent open house held by the applicant to help refine their thought process in the formulation of an application. The application was submitted following a public meeting, or a public information meeting was held in November of 2011. Very well attended. Likewise, it became an iterative process where the plan had evolved and grown and had been modified to reflect many of the concerns that had been expressed, albeit there was points of view that were quite divergent with respect to what should occur on those lands. And those thoughts too were heard by the proponent. including issues and concerns that were raised by SCORA, South Central Oakville Residents Association. And then in January of this year, there was a statutory public meeting that was held in front of Town Council. So the original concept that was ultimately submitted was representative from a policy perspective of the low-density residential and the medium attached housing form in the form of townhouses along Dorval and wrapping around the corner at Rebecca, with a park being centrally located or relatively centrally located within the subject lands. It was based on a grid pattern, road pattern throughout the area, with connections from Rebecca and onto Dorval as well, with the balance being single detached residential dwellings. There were approximately 62 single detached dwellings that were being proposed, and I think it was 65 single detached dwellings and 59 townhouses that were proposed at that point in time. But through the ongoing and the iterative process of all the public consultation, a number of issues kept being raised, obviously being the conformity with the livable Oakville official plan being of paramount, and that being implemented into an appropriate zoning categories onto those lands. Some of the other issues that were heard were strong urban design principles or elements, such as having a walkable community, one that's integrated appropriately with the adjacent neighborhood and connected to that adjacent neighborhood. A lot of issues raised about the adequacy of the parkland, whether or not what was being proposed was in fact adequate, or should there be a provision for additional parkland. It had to be a sustainable type of development, and it had to address the traffic concerns or issues that were being raised as far as appropriate connectivity onto the adjacent streets and the appropriate traffic volumes that would be generated from this site, and ensuring that the existing traffic and road network could accommodate the extra vehicles that were being generated by this site. There are obviously trees on the site, so there were concerns about the magnitude of tree loss and tree preservation that would occur on the site, and additional plantings to supplement what already exists. And engineering types of matters such as stormwater management, how would that be appropriately dealt with on this site? One of the issues and an alternative that was being put forward through the iterative public consultative process was a concept that recommended an apartment type of built form, so the notion being to concentrate some of the density on the site in a higher built form, thereby freeing up additional lands for open space and parkland purposes. That particular issue is addressed specifically in the staff report. So through that input that had been secured throughout this process, some principles started to evolve that the proponent was certainly cognizant and aware of, and led to some, firstly, some zoning principles that were incorporated into the ultimate proposal that you have before you this evening, and that's with respect to the issue of compatibility and how is the built form going to integrate into an existing and established residential neighborhood. And the most sensitive locations of the site obviously were around the edge, along the north side, abutting Mary Street, and along the west side, abutting the residential streets, and Weyburn Street, which is the street to the south, to the southwest of the site. So there was sensitivity around the lotting size, and to ensure a relative degree of compatibility with that. So the lands that you do see in, I think that's a light red or a pink along the west side, and the yellow and the purple are the largest lots that would be found within the entire area. The purple being lots in the magnitude of 18.3 meters in frontage, or approximately 60 feet. The reddish would be lots with a frontage of about 55 feet, or 16.7 meters in frontage. And the yellow, and this actually, those are lands that back onto St. James St. James Catholic School and Church, and given that they back onto open space, are smaller in relation to the lands to the north and south of it, and those would be in the magnitude of 50 feet. So the interior of the site and closer to Dorval, where it's not abutting existing residential, those lots are smaller in this area and to the south of that. So these are for smaller single-family homes on lots of approximately 40 feet in frontage or approximately 12 meters in frontage. And then to the east of some of the single detached dwellings in this location are townhouses, as is the block to the south of that. You can see a faint red line at the corner of Dorval and Mary Street. Those are actually town-owned lands. So through the process and the concern that they heard of there wanting to be a need for additional parkland, there was an understanding or a proposal put forth to increase the size of the parkland by approximately 47%, as indicated in the darker green, in exchange for the town-owned lands. So in consultation with our Realty Services Department, the comments back from that department is that it would be a relatively equitable land swap for the town-owned lands in exchange for a larger parkland. So that too is a recommendation, Your Worship, that you will find in the recommendation component of the staff report to increase that parkland in exchange for the sale of the town-owned lands and incorporation into the plan of subdivision in front of you. So this is a concept plan. It basically shows that same, it reflects the zoning in the previous slide and now superimposes on top of that a built form that you start to see evolve as a more of a livable type of community and how it can be laid out with that type of built form. You will notice that there are some rear garages that have been proposed, and this is a concept plan. The zoning is a bit more restrictive, Your Worship, in that the lots that abut Mary Street, there's a prohibition on rear garages in this area, so respect that this is simply a concept plan that has been put forward. But there was some concern about, where those rear garages would be situated, and they are in limited proximities and, throughout the plan, but not where they do abut those lots on Mary Street, given the sensitivity to existing single detached residential uses. The plan of subdivision to be considered a little bit faint, but again, this does reflect the precise lotting pattern that would be found on the draft approved plan, and there are a number of conditions attached as an appendix to the report that are conditions of draft plan approval that need to be implemented and fulfilled by the developer to realize the registration of the plan of subdivision that is before you this evening. So from a zoning perspective, as I mentioned, there are that lotting pattern and that lotting fabric is reflected with the various site-specific residential RO3 zones around the perimeter of the site to reflect that lotting pattern and lotting size that I had indicated. The interior, the single detached smaller lots would fall under the RO6 residential zoning category. The townhouses would comprise the lands identified as an RO7, and the town park would be an open space O1 zone. So, Mr. Chairman, there are a number of recommendations that you will find on the first page of the report this evening, as outlined in the report. I should mention, Mr. Chairman, there was within the report there was a finance. In the finance section, there was an issue raised by our finance department around whether or not the Canada Lands Company is in fact a division of the federal government, and if they would be exempt from development charges, either credits for the houses that existed or being waived from having to pay development charges, given the fact that they might be a Crown corporation. So they are in discussion with our legal department and our finance department to better resolve that issue. The planning applications before you are not necessarily affected by that outcome. It is a matter that would be deferred to the issuance of building permits. So whatever the appropriate statutes and laws require, then that is what will affect the issuance of building permits and the payment of development charges. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Mr. Mayor, there was also a memorandum that was hopefully was distributed to you with your package as well under today's date, and it just reflected some minor modifications to the zoning, some technical corrections that would implement the draft plan of subdivision that is before you as well. So just so that the two exactly align, it was necessary to make those technical modifications to the zoning bylaw and are explained in the memorandum in front of you tonight. So that basically concludes my presentation, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your detailed presentation. Councillor DeMoff.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and also thank you for all your on your work on this. It has certainly involved a number of meetings with the residents, and they've worked hard with Canada Lands to come to a plan that we're seeing here tonight. I have a few questions, and one of them does relate to our Residents Association. And one of the things that they had proposed at our last meeting was a condo project on the corner, which would have changed the landscape of the rest of the plan. So can you explain to us why that proposal was turned down by the planning department?
Certainly. To you, Mr. Mayor, the Livable Oakville plan was a plan that involved extensive public consultation in its own right to arrive, and because there was an acknowledgement that these lands, being the former Department of National Defense lands, contained housing. It was a site that was opportune for redevelopment, and there was acknowledgement that there was that opportunity for redevelopment, but it was a sensitive site in the context of an existing residential area. So that was the purpose for the amount of public consultation that was sought prior to the adoption of Livable Oakville, and which resulted in the special policy area being created. So it was through that very intensive public consultative process that resulted in the lands being, clearly identified as a low-density residential site, and it had to maintain the low-density density, but with allowance for some medium-density housing along Dorval Street and wrapping around Rebecca. But it was only in that context of it being compatible with the surrounding area. And there's very detailed criteria now in Livable Oakville about compatibility and appropriate forms of intensification. So it was in that context and around that low density residential designation, where those policies were formulated. The proposal that was put forward at the public meeting, the January public meeting, did deviate from that. It didn't comply, and it didn't conform with the intent of the official plan. So it actually would have required an official plan amendment. It was proposing a higher density from a density perspective and a built form perspective. So it was not consistent with the plan and would have undermined a lot of the objectives that did exist in Livable Oakville.
And I suspect it could have caused us problems going forward as well, given your explanation.
Absolutely.
Also, what kind of public input does the public have on the tree planting that goes along Dorval? Is there any at all? This is something else that had come from our Residents Association. I believe it was sent on to you as well, whether they, given what we were just talking about in terms of planting, do they have any say once everything is done on what trees get planted along Dorval, or is that something that's left with staff and the planning department?
It is a specific condition it is a specific condition in the conditions of draft plan approval that there be a detailed tree planting, plan brought forward. Mr. Lambert, the Director of Development Engineering, it's his department that does that review, so I may defer to him.
Certainly the public, if they have any questions or want to see the plan, we could make that available, but we'd be looking to sort of achieve the objectives within this plan, again, respecting, how the trees are being planted, looking for screening opportunities, and again, trying to, our ability to achieve the overall canopy cover in the area. But certainly if the public has a question or if they want to see the plan while it's going through the process of comment and review, be fully open to that.
Do you know at this point what type of trees will be going along there, or am I putting you on the spot?
At the moment, I don't know what type of trees.
Thank you. The concept plan that we were given by Canada Lands differs from the one that you were showing on the screen, and my question has to do with the rear garages. The plan that you showed it on all of them, although you spoke to the fact that they're not allowed in that zoning. The one that we got along Mary Street, those houses, there's only one existing house and 2 new houses that would have the rear garages. Can you clarify where it was and where it is and what the process is in terms of these rear garages?
Yes, and I'm referencing the urban design guidelines that they've submitted in the private realm guidelines in one of the documents that submitted with the application. And the intention is, and I'll try to go back, and it's rather small, but across the and that's the 867 zoned lands, and it's these lots that back on to lots fronting onto Mary Street. So on those lots, there would be no rear garages for that reason. Right at the bend, those units are proposed for rear garages. Those are pie-shaped lots being on the curve. One of the reasons being is because they are, in fact, pie-shaped lots, and they're very wide, and they have narrower frontage. So where you have the narrower frontage and you have front garages, that seems to really dominate the amount of frontage that you do have with asphalt and driveway and garage, because it is narrower at the street. So the notion was, given the excess rear yard space that's available, it would be an appropriate location for a rear garage. And it also affects the sight lines coming up, what's known as Street B, straight up there. It provides a very appropriate vista as you're driving up, and so the view is of the home and not the garage. So again, it's more on the bend. On the town-owned lands, there is a provision for the rear garages because they don't back onto any existing development, so the impact would be less. And then down along the side of Street B, where it abuts Weyburn, there is a proposed garage at the street corner, and I think there's only 2 or 3 other lots along that row of Street B. And one of the reasons being is because of the location of existing trees. So there are trees along there, and they're closer to the front of the property as opposed to the back. So there's an opportunity to preserve some of the existing vegetation by locating the garage towards the rear. So that's the principles behind the location of rear garages.
So the picture you have here is quite small. Can you just clarify then, there's 2 town-owned homes that will be on Mary, or not town-owned, sorry, 2 new homes being built on Mary Street?
Yes.
And then are there, the next 4 homes will not have rear garages on them? Because the concept plan I have actually does, or that we got actually does show one at the back of that 4th home. So I just want to clarify that is, and it's not a pie-shaped lot. So it's quite possible it's changed from what
I know the applicant is in attendance this evening, and he can maybe clarify that as well. It was my understanding that the proposed lots fronting onto Mary would not have rear garages, and under the 867 zone lands would not contain garages either. On the corner of the town-owned lands, those would have the garages.
I'll get them to clarify that.
Thank you.
Given what we've seen with another property in our ward in terms of trees coming down, can you go over for us the tree plan and also specifically what we have control over in terms of preserving trees, and what we don't, and how it would fit into our bylaws?
Okay. Given that this is we're dealing with the development of these lands through Planning Act applications, if you're referring to the town's private tree bylaw, we are considering this not through that process or not through that bylaw, but through these planning applications, realizing on balance there's land use policies, official plan policies that speak to appropriate level of redevelopment of these lands. We've gone through that evaluative exercise, put forward a recommendation to realize those development opportunities, that is going to result in tree loss on the site. But again, it's on that balance, and as Mr. Lambert has indicated, there is a requirement for a tree preservation plan to be submitted, and a tree preservation and a tree planting plan. So again, on balance, where is there an opportunity to preserve trees in the context of the development that is in front of us, and where are those opportunities for additional tree planting to take place?
Okay. Going forward, some of this might be able to be addressed in site plan. What kind of site plan provisions are in place for these?
The single detached dwellings will not be subject to site plan approval. Under the town site plan bylaw, townhouses are. So the townhouse blocks under the R07 will be subject to site plan. That's a public process as well. Residents are invited to attend and participate in the discussion around the approval of those plans.
Next question has to do with the setbacks. Some of them are quite small, the setbacks from the road, particularly on the interior roads. And I know that that was done in order to get a lead neighborhood designation, if I'm not mistaken. So can you go through why we are accepting those small, very small setbacks on those streets when they're definitely not what's in our official plan?
Right. Certainly. So maybe on balance, the RO3 zone would realize the more traditional setback. In this case, it would be a 6-meter setback. You know, maybe historically many homes have been set back at 7.5 meters. 6 meters still allows for that opportunity for an attached garage and an on-site parked car. So it still has that type of relationship to the street. Where there is a provision for a detached garage, and the garage being situated at the back, by default the home has to come forward to accommodate for the rear garage access. So yes, it does bring the dwelling unit closer to the street. There's still a setback. Typically it's in the range of 2.5 meters or 2.4 meters. But what it does is provide maybe a more enhanced streetscape along that street frontage, where the dwelling and the architectural elements of the home are featured, as opposed to one that has a garage attached to it. So it does differ, admittedly, from that traditional orientation at setback. That's why those are confined to more of the interior of the site and not adjacent to the perimeter of the site.
Okay, thank you. Traffic. We did have a traffic study submitted with this, and Councillor Duddick and I have met several times with our traffic staff, and I know there's a report coming to council in a few weeks. One of the issues that has come up, and there's been a few, the intersection of Weybourne and Rebecca. We understand that there will be timing done to the traffic signals to make gaps to allow people to be able to exit that street. Can you just confirm what and I guess it was probably directed to Mr. Lambert, what we're doing to assist those people who live in the Weybourne Drive area to get out of their subdivision?
Just following up on those discussions that we had, there is the requirement for the development to do improvements to the area, one of which is optimizing the signal at Rebecca Street and Dorval Drive, and implementing a new signal just north on Dorval Drive at the new entrance into this facility. In addition to that, through our discussions, our own staff are going to be looking at optimizing, I'll call it the string of signals along Rebecca Street, in particular from Dorval over to Morden, and looking at how the signals can be, I'll call it optimized or integrated to permit greater gapping opportunities for the residents on Weybourne.
And the new signal will also allow pedestrian access across Dorval. Is that not one of the major pluses to allow people to be able to cross Dorval in there?
Absolutely, that is very key.
Councillor Byrd.
I have just one question. Up until this development, we have tried to have Dorval Drive as sort of a controlled access road. And when we built in the development across the road, we put in a service road. Was that option looked at this side of the road so that on the east of this is clearly a service road that was designed in there to maintain the limited access onto Dorval Drive? Now I see this side, the service road is gone and a new signal light is put in. Was this, I'm just asking, there must have been, discarded the idea, the option of a service road entrance, and why? Or was it considered at all?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the option of a service road here was not explored. We certainly looked at all the options as the plan went through the evolution as to what will the road network accommodate, and a new entrance onto a new full movements entrance onto Dorval certainly is sufficient to support this development and maintain the integrity of our road network.
So the new entrance feature, does that line up with Dean Avenue? I'm looking at the map here, and I'm just looking at the zoning, the approximate density. It doesn't, what's across the road is what, a development called Barclay Square. The number of units here looks like it pretty well mirrors on the other side of the road, but we ended up with two different traffic patterns and a couple of other accesses onto Dorval Drive, which we were trying to eliminate originally. Dorval Drive was designed as a controlled access road. I'm not telling you know that. And we've tried to maintain that integrity up through Glen Abbey and up through Niagawa and I guess up to the Jim Snow Parkway eventually. Now we come here, which looks to me as a layman, the development not that dissimilar to what's in the area, and all of a sudden the service road wasn't even, it was discarded, which would have maintained the integrity of Dorval Drive. At least we did it on the other side of the road. I can't see why it wasn't even looked at this side.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the evolution of this whole entire area probably precedes me. I'm not sure which came first, Dorval Drive coming down through or having Margaret Drive into the area. So I'm not so sure.
Dorval to Margaret came first. Barclay Square came second.
I'm aware of the more recent evolutions in the area. To address one of your questions, does this new entrance road line up with Dean Avenue? No, it is slightly north of that. But again, probably to fully answer your question, no, a service road concept was not looked at. But again, this new access, full movements onto the roadway does preserve the integrity and the function of Dorval Drive in a very similar fashion as a controlled access highway would work. It's not one to say that you can't have an access. It's controlled and then allowed to happen where permitted.
Well, if I'm just looking at it, if we put one access point and extended Dean across the road and put a four-way intersection there, you eliminate the need for at least one of the two accesses, and you kind of, looks like you formalize the whole traffic function on Dorval Drive. We don't have to tear out the islands and put in stay-by, what do you call them, lay-by or left-hand turn lanes. Also strikes me as a left-hand turn coming out of this is going to be problematic because you're crossing two lanes of oncoming traffic, are you not, to go north? I mean, there was a reason you put the service road in, and it's worked quite well. I just was surprised it was just abandoned just because we abandoned it.
Just in response, I would add, through you, Mr. Mayor, The depth of the property, there were a number of elements that were trying to be achieved on this property. For example, trying to maintain a compatible edge with the development on Weyburn and on Mary Street. And in order to achieve that lot fabric that was very similar to Weyburn and Mary, it takes up a certain amount of area. And then you have only so much land left until you get to Dorval. So to keep the townhouses on the edge, and the similar depth and width of lots along that eastern or western and northern edge of the property, there's not enough land left over in order to provide for that, similar to Margaret Street. If you look at the other side of the road where the Barclay Square is, you will see that there is a single family lot that actually is outside of the Barclay Square that fronts onto, I think is that Maurice? Margaret? Oh, and on the other side onto Maurice. And that's a much deeper depth in property in order to accommodate the service road and then the development. So I think that's part of the reasons with the park, trying to accommodate a compatible edge and retain the townhouse development on the edge. There was only so much land area left to be able to accommodate all those elements, and that was part of the rationale.
Actually lost some units, is that it? To do it, you're saying the density, you couldn't meet the road pattern on the east side of Dorval Drive on the west side because we wanted to increase the density. It strikes me the only difference, I looked at these, the properties look not dissimilar on the east and west. If you go between the road with a different road, and we've come up with entirely a deal and ended up with the same sort of form, townhouses, maybe more townhouses on the west side than we had on the east side. And in order to do that, we were saying, well, we had to make that work to have more townhouses and a greater density. We had to change the road pattern that was established, which was the service road concept and controlled access Dorval Drive. So I understand, I've asked the question, I got the answer. It's basically to meet a density target.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Councillor Demoff has covered everything quite well. The one question I did have, and it pertains to the traffic light, the new traffic light that will be introduced. I know there was some speculation or some questioning from residents in the area regarding could we sort of phase that in over time? And just to give some sort of reassurance, again, similar to what we are doing along Rebecca, we can affect the timing, can we not? So that as population or things start building out the way it is, and with the population density on that property, we can, like in other words, it's not going to go in at a certain timing that people think, oh, we're being bottlenecked already. In other words, we can gradually increase that to suit the demands on the roadway.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I'm getting the question right, the timing of when the signal goes in?
No, the
Or
operation
just
of
the
the signal.
timings?
She's asking to be reassured that once you establish the timing of the signal, you can adjust it later, as you've already indicated you plan to do on Rebecca.
Then the answer is absolutely, yes.
No problem, no charge. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you. Through your worship, I'm just interested in this parkland swap. How many lots does the town have that we traded for parkland? Was there a monetary exchange also, or was it just a one-for-one?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in consultation with our Realty Services Department, they advise that it's almost an identical land swap. So they felt there was no need for any monetary credit or payback to the developer, that it would basically be considered a neutral swap. We would get the increase in parkland, and they would obtain the town-owned lands at the corner.
How many lots did the town, are they able to put on the town's property?
It's approximately 4 lots.
So we exchanged 4 lots for,
For a proportionate increase in parkland.
is that the norm at the town that we do that kind of a deal? It sounds like a pretty good deal to me if I'm on the development side of the world.
It was considered an appropriate land swap, so given that the areas are almost identical, it's a situation that Realty Services felt was appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnston?
Could you maybe explain that the land we got for park, how many houses could they have built on that land?
I haven't lotted that out exactly, but I think it would roughly be the 4 as well, so.
So thank you, Councillor Johnston. From 2 different directions, it's 1 for 1, no matter how you count it, apparently.
Your Worship, if I may also, there is another matter, going back to the matter of the rear garages, in looking specifically at the bylaw that is in front of you on page 2 under Roman numeral number 10. So that does relate to the lands that are zoned 867. So that's the zone that is proposed for the lots that do back onto the lots that front onto Mary and also down the side. But there is a clause that does make reference to a minimum required interior side yard where a driveway is leading to a detached private garage located in a rear yard, and that would be of 3 meters. So by default, that would allow for rear garages from a zoning perspective to be situated on those lands. In the urban design brief, those lots have not been earmarked for rear garages and would be more in the traditional format, but I did want to bring that to your attention, that permission does exist based on the zoning bylaw.
And is that, well, I got a question related to that, but before we go to my question, let's chase this one. So what are you saying about the 867s? Is there garages in the rear or not?
From a zoning perspective, yes, they would be permitted.
And do you need to change that?
To preclude those from taking place, that would be advisable.
All right. Would you have language available for us to include in any eventual motion?
I'd have to take a minute just to ensure that the language were crafted properly. It could be a combination of a map change and or text change.
So perhaps you'd like to propose language that directs staff to achieve that outcome of protecting against rear garages on those 867 lands?
Certainly. Yeah.
And council will trust you guys to change it, all the places that you need to change it. Mm-hmm. Commissioner, are you okay with that?
I was actually going to suggest, Mr. Mayor, that if you wanted to give us that direction, then we could take the bylaw back, make those changes, and just bring the bylaw forward to the next meeting in June 11th for you to actually endorse the bylaw at that point in time. I'm just a little reluctant making changes to the bylaw now because you're going to approve a bylaw today.
All right. Very well. So the suggestion would be to defer the bylaw or refer the bylaw back to staff for suitable changes. Okay, to my question. Mr. McConnell, we heard earlier this evening that you have a concept plan drawing and a member of council has a concept plan drawing, and they aren't the same. And so concerns were expressed about the difference between the two. What is a concept plan drawing legally anyway, and whose concept plan drawing, if any concept plan drawing matters, whose matters, yours or whatever a member of council has? Like, what's the role of a concept plan drawing vis-a-vis the official permissions that we're giving, and whose drawing governs here, yours or someone else?
A concept plan is just that. It's conceptual in nature. It doesn't have any legal status. It's not a zoning bylaw schedule, which, as we're talking about, is a bylaw that's adopted by council. It's not the draft plan of subdivision, which represents another formal approval through an application of a plan of subdivision leading to the registration. So it's a conceptual design and conceptual layout to show conceptually where massing can occur and structures. And through this 2-year process, there have been a number of concept plans to reflect various aspects of the plan. So, you know, there are a number of plans that exist. Councillor Demoff has indicated that the concept plan she was referring to is one that is more recent than an earlier iteration.
Okay, but the most important thing you've said is that we're not approving any concept drawing, and the concept drawing has no legal status and carries with it, there's no approval of any kind from us.
That's correct.
Okay, just so everybody's clear on that. Councillor Elgar has another question.
Help me understand why we're not going to take development charge money for this proposal. It seems like we've been pretty consistent about taking development charges. Now, what makes this one different?
Commissioner.
The note in the staff report was an interpretation of what staff had thought Canada lands are and whether or not they're exempt from development charges. We still are sorting that out through the legal department with them to define who they are. In all cases, the legislation under the Development Charges Act would prevail, and we would be charging them what we could be charging them through the provisions in that act. So at this point in time, those who they are and whether or not they're exempt or not exempt has not been finalized, but we'd be doing that before they came in with their building permits.
Okay, so we haven't blown away that money yet. Okay, thank you.
Such a brutal way of putting it. Well, I'm sure staff is aware that council prefers development charges be collected. And an interesting question would be, do other municipalities accept development charge payments from Canada Lands? And if they do, that might be a clue that we could rely on. All right, Madam Clerk, you want to call the first registered delegation?
Yes, we have Ms. Karen Brock here again from Oakville Green.
Ms. Brock, we should get you a seat closer to the podium.
Cozier cooler over there. Good evening. Oakville Green admits that the inevitability of infill development, and certainly admits to some of the desirable benefits of infill development. But certainly in the case of these lands, as we recently experienced a couple of weeks ago, this is one of the downsides of infill development. And I probably don't have to tell you that Oakville Green is quite disappointed that over 70% of the trees, existing trees on this property will be removed. I did want to ask a couple of questions and make a couple of comments. One about the tree preservation plan, and also about the compensation ratio. I did remark something quite interesting by the arborist, who I presume is retained by the developer, on page 168 of your booklet there, where the arborist remarks, and I've never seen this before, they recommend the removal of all Norway and Manitoba maples that were proposed for retention in the tree preservation plan. So my first question is, how many trees does this entail? And secondly, is this a wise decision? If these healthy trees provide canopy cover and are not within or nearby a natural area, certainly nothing as sensitive as the natural heritage system. And I can't see the town of Oakville would go ahead and do something like this, because Norway maples are number 2 on the top 3 species that dominate in terms of leaf area. So it seems a rather odd recommendation that I can see. So I'm not sure, maybe you can help me whether this recommendation is going through or not. Also, I did want to talk about the caliper trees, and in the case of trees, size does matter. Large caliper trees, as portrayed in the U4 report, provide greater benefits because of the greater canopy cover. So I think it's important to realize that with this canopy cover removal, what is the tree compensation ratio? And are we going to be sure that we're not going to be replacing tree for tree? And we want to be sure that the trees that are planted, and I guess that leads me to my next comment, is that I assume that the newly minted Urban Forest Strategic Management Plan will apply to this new development, and where the trees will benefit from an increased soil volume. So I'm just wondering if those could be addressed, those questions could be addressed.
Thank you for your questions. We'll take more we'll go through the entire, and then we'll deal with the questions. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Stefan Babasic from Skora.
Welcome, Mr. Babasic. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you very much. My first point tonight is that Skora was disappointed that the townhouse format is being accepted rather than the boutique-style condo. Again, as mentioned several times this evening, a condo would have maximized the overall green space and maintained several of the mature trees on the property. However, we understand that an OP amendment was not a road town staff was willing to go down. In speaking with the park, we'd like to see a larger parkland, because the parkland being given up by the city far exceeds this 47% increase of the central park being proposed. Also to speak, sorry, to backtrack here, also to speak on the condo thing, Skora did submit several plans that did show a, what they call a window street that would have mirrored the Barclays Square. However, those were quickly shut down, which is why we had to kind of resort to a condo type plan to help preserve the trees and address the traffic situation. Skora believes the traffic lights on Dorval between the existing lights on Mary and Rebecca are too close. Perhaps don't implement the lights at the start and monitor the situation once everything is developed and settled. And finally, the Dorval streetscape highly impacts the entire community. We would like to be able to set strict guidelines and have a strong say in the type and size and number of trees and landscaping along Dorval. We'd like to know how much of an impact we would have, and we don't want to make sure our points don't fall on deaf ears. Additionally, with all the streets being added in the proposed, the streets added in the proposed plans, as many of you know, several trees are planted on the boulevard between the multi-use path and Dorval. Several of the trees that were just planted will come down as a result of the 3 new entrances, so it's kind of a laughable point there. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babasic. Questions? Thank you. Madam Clerk?
We have Roger Martin and Eric Turcott here representing Canada Lands Company for the applicant, and Urban Strategies Inc. also for the applicant.
Good evening. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's been 2 years in the process of making this plan. We think it's a very positive addition to Oakville. As was stated, that we are aiming to achieve a LEED ND community. We think it fits well into the community, and it's been a very, very positive, we think a positive process of working with the community as well as with your staff, which I want to thank very much for all the work that they've done over the last few years. And we look forward to implement this plan. So if you have any question, I'm here. I'm Eric Turcott with Urban Strategies. We have Roger Martin, who's with CLC, and a few members of our team who are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Delic might take you up on that. And Councillor DeMont.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Given the LEED neighborhood design, I know that was raised early on in the onset of this dialogue and proposals, that was not something that was even an option for Canada Lands. That was something that there's a direction that they want to go towards LEED neighborhood design. Is that correct?
It's always an option. I mean, we think first of all, it's the right thing to do in terms of building community, to having sustainable community. It's a system that's in place to actually help guide development. We did an evaluation to see if we actually was possible or not. We saw that there was the opportunity, and we think it creates a much more a much more urban, a much more tight, close-knit, with really good urban design community. So we actually think it's the right thing to do.
Okay, I guess what I was trying to get at was that even though Councillor DeMoff and myself and residents had raised the setback issues and the fact that having something so close to the street edge was not something that we felt was in keeping with the area, every time Canada Lands would respond that in order to attain that LEED's neighborhood design, that was a specific requirement that you had to proceed with and you wanted to proceed with, put it that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are some setback requirements, which would be, you know, we've set in the bylaw a minimum of 2.4. I mean, but these would actually kind of vary slightly. There are lots of examples, though, where you can actually achieve really wonderful streetscape. It's not like because you have a small setback. First of all, there is a tree that are planted in the boulevard, and because they are where those smaller setbacks are, is also where we have rear yard garage. So therefore, you actually have less asphalt in the front, more areas and length in the boulevard for tree planting, and then also within the frontage of these houses that are actually quite. You're right, they're quite close. Within that very setback, you still have actually the opportunity to plant trees and to actually have very positive landscaping in that zone. So it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't compromise the quality of the street. What it does is makes a very nice close-knit street where, you know, it's very comfortable for a pedestrian and it has less asphalt on which to, you know, to cross as you actually move along the houses.
Okay, and you mentioned that you have other staff members or representatives for Canada Lands here. Is there somebody who could respond to the question that was raised earlier by Ms. Brock from the Oakville Green in regards to the species and the recommendation that they be removed, the Norway maple and the other one?
There is a condition in the draft plan, and I believe it comes from the region, about removing I believe it's Manitoba maple. It's not our intention to remove any trees that don't have to be removed. There's no question.
So you're saying that was a recommendation of the region that?
It's, you know, it's in the draft plan condition. And there is a condition about removal of invasive species.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Moff.
First thing I wondered if you could do for us, thank you very much for working and meeting with us as often as you have. Can you explain to everyone and to people who may be watching this what LEED's neighborhood design even is? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who have no idea of what it is, because it's not something that's very common in Canada at all.
No, it's a North American standard, which stands for Leader in Energy and Environmental Design. So it is a standard that has been put forward. It's a North American standard that looks at achieving better buildings. It originally started with buildings itself. So how to actually create more efficient building, healthier building that require less ventilation and actually basically healthier. And that will actually have less of a drain in our resources over a long-term period. So it's looking also at the long-term picture that these over the long-term, 50 or 100 years, you know, will actually have a much smaller impact. So it actually always try to improve on the current standard and building practice that we have today. So now it has been extended to include commercial space, but also neighborhood, which sets a series of principles of how should neighborhood be designed. They should be quite accessible. They should actually have, you know, be very walkable. They should be green. They should have also, you shouldn't actually waste land as well. So they should actually be, you know, a certain amount of compactness. So there's actually they create very positive environment. So this system, which is, it's actually, some municipality are using it as their standard, or a lot of municipality are also, such as Toronto, I believe Markham, are actually using a kind of a LEED-like, so they actually take some of their standard and actually apply them to create their own sustainability standard that they can enforce and continue to build upon. And it is in your policy. It is referenced in some of your policy that is, you know, in terms of trying to achieve better sustainable community. It's actually one of the reference that you make to that. You encourage people trying to meet these standards.
Thank you very much. Also, I know I wanted to ask, just following up on Councillor Duddick's questions about the trees and Ms. Brock's research on it. What about the Norway maples that are on the site that are being recommended to be brought down? Do you know why those are being included?
I couldn't tell you. I understand that the Manitoba maple are quite an invasive species. Norway, I know that they're not necessarily native from here. No, I couldn't actually give.
If you, Councillor, if you'd like, Mr. Lambert could give you that answer now.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just in reading page 168, that's actually a letter issued by Conservation Halton. And that's sort of their position. That's not written from the arborist to the tree specialist who wrote that. So their recommendation is, because the Norway maple and Manitoba maple are an invasive species, their recommendation would be please remove invasive species from the site because of the harm that they could cause. That being said, that was their comment. And if you were to look at the arborist report that came in, there are a number of Norway and Manitoba maple that are in good stead and would be preserved on the site.
Just in case the audience and the people at home didn't hear that, what Mr. Lambert just said is that they're, notwithstanding the advice of Conservation Halton that the invasive species Manitoba and Norway be removed, there are several specimens of each that will be retained in the plan that's before us here. And I hope that clears that up for people. Councillor DeMoff.
At one time, I know there's a number of ash trees on the property, and at one time, Canada Lands had talked about treating those ash trees. I'm just wondering if in fact that was done, and if not, if there are plans to treat those ash trees that are on the site.
Yes, they have been treated.
Thank you. So you proactively went out. That was about a year ago, I guess,
Absolutely.
that we spoke about that. So that's really good to hear. Thank you.
And during the demolition period too, we actually had fencing around the trees to preserve, to actually not compact around the tree root system.
When you hear numbers that over 70% of the trees are coming down on the site, can you give some? Can you comment on that? I guess that's a pretty big number to put out there, that 70% of the trees on the site are coming down.
No, it is a big number. We are preserving all the trees that are on the periphery of the site, that are on the western, the northern edge. Also, all the trees, obviously, that are not, they're just abutting our properties. We are also preserving trees that would fall within the park. The park space that we are creating, so those would be preserved. And then, because we have to have, there's the trees, we have to put the houses. So as we move forward, there will be some, we will have to remove. I mean, that's the nature, unfortunately, of developing the land. When we go on site, though, anytime we see that, surgically, we can actually move the house a little bit to the left, move it a little bit backward, try to actually see if there are a few more trees during the construction, during the process of designing the houses, we would actually make a serious attempt in trying to preserve those who would fall like in some backyard in some areas, and that would also not be affected by the grading of the land. We will be but if something that's for sure is we will be following the plan, the techniques that you actually had mentioned earlier in planting new street trees. Actually, I'm a big fan of trees, and actually I'm commending the town for actually taking those measures, to actually ensuring proper tree growth and increasing your tree canopy within the urban environment.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Duddick.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Just sort of building on that, when you were saying going through the design, my understanding was that what made this particular property unique compared to some of the other properties we deal with developers is that what is agreed to is what's going to be built. In other words, the work that's gone into it prior to the shovel going in the ground everybody has an understanding of what's going to be built on the site. So when you just mentioned something about accommodating a tree or something on site, would that be something that you would draft in your design of the property and then in turn sell to a developer? In other words, your indication to preserve a tree on that particular lot?
I think it would be, first of all, the concept that you've seen, that you have in front of you is the intent of what is to be built, and the zoning, it's, those are not, things that we're questioning. It's just sometimes when you get closer to the ground, when you actually, you build, and if it means like, cutting a little corner of your house or doing some tiny little adjustment, if it helps to, because sometimes, it's not an exact science.
Totally agree, but my concern is that you may have a different attitude towards that tree preservation than, say, the next step in the process, i.e. a developer who has bid on, say, 10 lots. When you pass it on to that particular developer, will those recommendations that you've just made reference to, in the odd situation where you think it would be in the best interest to preserve a tree, to adjust the building envelope accordingly?
We have in the urban design guidelines, urban design brief that was submitted to the town, we actually are going to go after to the process of part of that indicates that there would be a peer review happening with the selected house builder and has a in order to conform with lead ND. And to conform with the zoning, conform with the design brief, just to ensure. So part of that peer review process that would be the builder would go through. These are things that would be reviewed and ensuring that if there are small possibilities and things like that, we would definitely encourage that. So there is still another level of process that happens that can ensure these things to happen or encourage these things to happen at least.
Thank you.
Finally, thank you very much, Mr. Turcotte. There's only one hanging question, which you may be able to answer. If not, we'll go to Mr. Lambert. But that was the caliper size of the replacement trees. Do you happen to have any information on that?
I don't know. I do not have the numbers offhand.
All right. And Mr. Lambert gives me a signal that he hasn't got that information either, but someone's running down with something. Anyway, there's motion. It's motion on the field.
Still no, but I do not know the answer by heart. But we would go with. Our intention is to follow the bylaws and what would be required.
All right. Then on behalf of council, I thank you for your being here and bringing us your information. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
That completes our list of delegations on this item.
All right. I'll call the audience for members of the public with information for council. Sir, I see a hand here. Anyone else? All right, sir. It looks like you get to clean up.
Yes.
Let me get my buttons working. Please introduce yourself, and council looks forward to your information.
My name is Gordon Bobasich. It appears to me, and I might have bad eyes, but that the lands that the town is going to give up far exceeds the proposed increase in the parkland. Is it not possible for the planning department to confirm this today by telling us exactly what is the square footage that is being given up and what exactly is the square footage that is being added to the parkland? I'd like that clarified. And I don't see why that measurement should not be available today.
Anything else, Mr. Bobasich?
No.
Thank you very much for your question.
Okay.
Madam Commissioner, among your resources, do you have the answer to the question of the square footages involved?
Based on the report on page 124, the area of land that the town owns is about 0.16 of a hectare in size. And the requirement for the parkland, 5% off of the land itself, is about 0.33. So you add those two together and you come up with about, it's pretty close to the 0.48 hectares that's being dedicated as part of the proposal. So literally it is the swapping of parkland on Mary Street to parkland within the development site at an equal for equal value, and then adding to that value the 5% that they'd be required to give.
So the difference, as I do the math, is 0.01 hectare.
That's right.
All right. All right, I'll now confine it to table. Oh, there's another hand? Mrs. Bobasich. Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Just have one question that I'd like clarified. When in speaking about the lead, and a lot of focus has been on the front yards and the front properties, but the part I haven't heard is, and that I don't understand, is if you're putting a garage in the backyard and you have this driveway going from the front to the backyard, you're totally removing someone's backyard. And on these smaller lots, which I think you said are 40 to 50 foot wide, they're not that large to start with, and it sounded like the setbacks are not that far in the front, so you don't have a large front yard, and now you're cutting into the backyard with a garage and a driveway. So I don't understand that and the concept of lead. And another question, the townhouse area, the parking, because they, from my recollection, and again, there's been several concept drawings, so I just want to be clear on this. They appear to have no driveways per townhouse, which meant, my understanding is there's only garages, which means people have to always be in their garage. So where do visitors park? And if you have 69 or 60 units of townhouses, where do these people park, especially in the winter when there's snow? And I mean, there's always cars, maintenance, people visiting, just, there's always cars and trucks and people. So where are they all going to be if there's no parking?
Anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions. Madam Commissioner.
Actually, I think it would probably, Charlie McConnell would be best to answer the question if you have a question relative to the visitor parking in the rear yards.
All right, Mr. McConnell, perhaps you could run us through the parking arrangements for the townhouses and the visitors, and I can just volunteer that snow clearing and removal is a site plan matter, and the townhouses, as you heard earlier, will be at site plan. Generally, Councillor Elgar, who's on that committee, requires people to cart away their snow from townhouses. We'll see how it goes on that matter. Fair warning to Canada Lands. Mr. McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The lands that are zoned for the street townhouses are subject also to site plan. So it would be through that process when the application comes forward, the applicant would have to demonstrate the appropriate rear laneway access and accessibility to the rear garages and the driving areas, and the provision of adequate visitor parking spaces. There is a standard, an established standard in the zoning bylaw, and the applicant would have to demonstrate compliance with that.
But for the purpose for tonight, your information is then we have a requirement for these different kinds of parking, and they'll be required to meet those requirements in our rules.
That's correct.
All right, and can you also answer the implied question about if you have a rear garage on some of these properties here, will there be any backyard, or will it totally remove the backyard?
Again, we have to see the details through the site plan. These are typically narrower lots, and they would provide for a single car garage. So it's not like a full double car garage taking up the total area of the rear space, so it's a single-car garage, and there would still be some rear yard amenity space as well. Those details would come out through the zoning process, or sorry, through the site plan process.
So I could imagine that it might be similar to a home I once owned in North Toronto where I had a laneway that went beside the house to a single-car garage that was behind the house, and I still had a backyard.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there are a number of situations like that do exist.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Demoff.
Could you clarify for us then which of these, which ones are going to site plan? The ones with rear garages are not townhouses. So if you could just clarify for us what lots are subject to site plan and which are not.
The lands that are zoned R07 are the townhouses. So those are the ones that are subject to a site plan approval. The R06 zone lands, many of those do accommodate rear garages. They are not subject to site plan, but that's just a single detached dwelling with the garage at the back with ample rear yard amenity space to the side of the garage. But those are not required to go through site plan approval.
So then really none of the ones that have rear garages will be coming to site plan then?
If they are the townhouses, then they will.
Call me crazy, but I don't see any rear garages on any of the townhouses, other than it would be part of the townhouse. Am I missing something here?
No. The R07 zones allow for townhouses. There are rear lanes, rear access lanes. So the entire site layout would come to us through a site plan application, which would show the rear garages behind those townhouses and how they would be accessed, and our development engineering would evaluate that from the geometrics of that rear laneway, make sure that there's appropriate turning radiuses for cars to access into those rear garages, and meet all proper engineering and technical standards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for clearing that up, Mr. McConnell, and thank you for asking the question to get it cleared up. All right, then confined at the table, I'm looking for a decision.
And Your Worship, just on the, if I may, to get to the point of the deferral of the zoning bylaw, we have crafted modified wording for recommendation number 1 to deal with that. And if I may,
please,
it would read as follows. The first part of the statement would remain the same in that the zoning bylaw amendment application file Z1617.39 submitted by Canada Lands Corporation as amended be approved, period, and a new statement. Staff be directed to make the appropriate change to the zoning bylaw to not permit rear yard garages adjacent to Mary Street, and bring the bylaw to the next council meeting on July 11th or June 11th.
Okay. Everybody got that? It's pretty simple, straightforward. So I'll look to the ward councillors first. Councillor Demoff.
I will move the staff recommendation as amended. I commend staff and Canada Lands, but especially the residents who have spent the better part of a year working on this to come up with a plan that has changed quite a bit from what we first looked at, and recognizing that it's not perhaps not what all the residents would have liked to have seen, given what's in our official plan and what we've been working with. I have to admit Canada Lands has been very cooperative in terms of working with residents. I haven't been on council that long, but certainly compared to many developers with whom we've had, Councillor Duddick and I have had meetings with, they've been very willing to work with us and with residents. So I'm happy to move the recommendation as amended, both for just now, and there was also a recommendation that was, or an amendment that was given to us earlier this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Demoff. Councillor Duddick, did you want to speak also? Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll put the vote then. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is adopted. Thank you. Now, we have no discussion items, but we do have the advisory committee minutes from Heritage Oakville's May 8th meeting. Anyone? Councillor Adams? Councillor Adams moves the staff recommendation. Discussion? All in favor? Carried. Any new business, Council? Thank you. Then I need a mover for consideration and, well, actually, we need a, do you want? Let's have a mover to rise and report. Councillor Lapworth, all in favor? That carries. I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on public hearing item 1, discussion items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and advisory committee minutes item 8, as noted by the clerk. I need a mover and seconder for this report. Councillor Elger, thank you. Councillor Knoll, thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The report is adopted. That completes the agenda. Thank you very much for your time and attention. That's what we just did. No? Oh. What? Oh, I beg your pardon. All right, so now we need a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaw. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Mover and seconder, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Johnston. This is approval for 2012-43 as revised. The bylaw to amend the Town of Oakville's North Oakville zoning bylaw 2009-189 as amended. All in favor? Opposed? And bylaw 2012-53 is included in that. The bylaw to confirm the proceedings of meeting of council. So all in favor? Opposed? The bylaws are adopted. Thank you for your time and attention, I should stress. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.